As the Chancellor has just mentioned, I have been involved in media events for the last 3 weeks. I've been visiting the campuses off and on largely since mid-April, and have spent a number of days on each campus and visited with most subsets of the organization, students, faculty, staff, unions, governance officials, etc. Have a pretty good sense of the campuses, and that will continue. We're getting ready to install me as president. We're never sure what word to use, inaugurate, install, coronate, or beatify, but none of them have great connotations necessarily, so we're probably going to use inaugural, actually, but on November 1. And in getting ready for that, where part of my job is to have a short, succinct speech that sets a vision for the campus and the system, campuses and the system. I've been not only soliciting from my direct reports, including the chancellors who work with me day to day, but the campuses and now the media to see what you're interested in. And then in about 2 weeks, I guess, we will launch a statewide caravan tour where we will drive a bus for 3.5 to 4 days, starting in North Adams and winding up in Boston, where we will meet with business community and business leaders across the state and governmental leaders across the state to solicit not so much what UMass is doing for them as is where UMass can do more for them. We're interested in looking at where the voids are. We'll listen to some of the accolades, but we really want to spend the time learning where we need to do more. And that will take us to about the 3rd week in October, which is about a week before the inaugural, and continue to develop the foundation that I've been working on since January, really, when I was appointed, on where I see me helping the system go next. But let me focus on the system just for a moment, then I'll open up for Q&A. We are a 5-campus system, 70,000 students, 400,000 plus alums across the globe, generating 13, 14, or 15,000, depending on the new graduates every year, with 80% of them staying here in Massachusetts. We are definitely the largest single component of providing the educated citizenry for Massachusetts and the economy in Massachusetts, and we will continue to grow and continue to play that role. Each campus is a research-intensive campus, which differentiates us from the state universities and the community colleges, because the thing that differentiates different types of campuses is really teaching emphasis and research emphasis in the mix. And in the system, all 5 campuses are unique. They all have unique histories. Some are very young, some are very, very old, as much as 150 years old. Some are much more research intensive than others. We have a research productivity at the medical school approaching $300 million a year, and we have smaller campuses doing as small as $30 to $35 million a year, with this campus about almost $50 million a year. Same thing is true of PhD production, varies. But more importantly, each of the 5 campuses has its own peer group. I like to say, just as an example, if you were using Wisconsin as a comparison, University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is the flagship campus, would be a peer for UMass Amherst. You might get either, let's say, a Wisconsin-Milwaukee or a similar campus that would be a peer for this campus. Right. Both parts of the same family, but just like families, brothers and sisters are different. And that we're going to build on those strengths. We're not trying to make every campus the same. We want them to be similar, family, but have their own unique roles. And in this campus, being in the middle of the largest metropolitan area in the state and one of the largest in the country, a big part of its role is to serve that metropolitan area. And I was president and helped form a group 25 years ago known as the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities. UMass Boston has always been an integral part of that group. As a matter of fact, a faculty member here 25 years ago named Ernie Linton was one of the, we used to call him, he was the soul of the organization. He was one of the thinkers that came up with the organization. We were trying to look at ways to better explain how campuses like UMass Boston are so vital to that urban core. And it's not just access. It's so many other things that they do beyond access for education, economic development, quality in the schools, quality of life in the community. And I'm really, really pleased to see what the Chancellor and the campus are doing, and more importantly, what have been doing, since, I guess, the early 60s.
Right.
And I applaud that. We will continue to build on that strength also. But that's a thumbnail. I can talk about anything you'd like. The only thing I don't like to talk about is parking problems on campus. I'll turn those over to the Chancellor, but we can talk about anything else you like. Yes.
When you were at Townsend University, you were best known for the achievement gap, helping to bridge the achievement gap between blacks and whites. I was wondering what you're going to do for the UMass system on that.
Right. I have been developing. I'm a believer when you come into a campus. I haven't moved a lot in my life, but I've had three major significant moves now. From Maryland was where I started teaching after I left graduate school in New Hampshire. I was there 21 years, went to California as president for 9. That was a major move. Came back to Towson for 8 as president, and now here. Three major moves. And in each of those, you look at the campus and you say, you know, what's needed. And in each of those, I've built on what was there as we determined what was needed. I don't like to come in. I think it's ridiculous actually for leaders to come in and just sort of upheave everything and start scratch. You build on strengths that have been developed over decades. And so what I'm doing in this system is I looked at what the board had a retreat a couple of years ago and came up with 10 major areas of interest, which include, it's not rocket science, but included excellence in teaching, excellence in research, the kind of infrastructure you need, i.e. facilities and equipment to make that possible, great faculty, a whole series of things like that. So within there I said, where can a system head working with the chancellors and the campuses have the most important impact today? And I've come up with 6 theme areas that all fit within what the board wants to do, but put emphasis in 6 specific areas. And I've been bouncing those areas for weeks now, months now, off of people, and people like them, including the board. And so we're building what we're going to do with most emphasis, not exclusively what we're going to do, but the emphasis areas around student success, which is what you just asked me about, which is retention and graduation and sort of throughput of students going into our campuses and coming out of our campuses. Educated citizenry, which will have a subtitle of workforce production, i.e. particularly STEM majors and health profession majors. Helping society be better, working with the schools as this campus is in terms of Success Boston or Complete College, which is a national agenda. Working on the research agenda to continue to ramp it up. We do $550 million a year in research right now. We'd like to get that up to $750 million a year. And improving to the state and to the elected officials that we are spending our dollars wisely, because we always get criticized for, you know, just doing whatever we want, not apparently thinking about what we're doing, which is not true. But we're going to prove to them that most of our money is going into the things they expect it to go into, which is education of students, output on the research side. And then finally, the thing I'm doing, which is what I'm doing today, is telling and selling the UMass story. We've got to get the message about UMass out there more. But let me go back to the achievement side. We're going to look at each campus, which has very different challenges, because you're all taking different kinds of students who have different backgrounds from different schools, and you're not going to get them all through at the same rate. So how can we improve them all? And if you have a graduation rate that's 35 to 45%, how can we get it up to 45 to 55%? If you're at 65 to 75, how do we get it up to 80? And we're going to do that on each of the campuses, and each of them will approach it in the way that meets the needs of their student body. What you find with student success, it's a combination of 2 things. One is the quality of the student coming in general, and that's why Towson was so successful. We had a very strong set of students coming in terms of SAT and GPA profile. But for the ones that don't come in with the kind of background that can sort of do it on their own almost, what kind of support structure do you have in place? And at Towson, I was able to get the 6-year graduation rate up to over 70%, which is like most of the major research public universities in the country. It's very, very high. And as you mentioned, the black-white, brown-white rate was the same. And we had, for example, the African-American population was about 2,300, so it wasn't it wasn't a small number of people, it was a large number of people. And we also had access programs, like top 10% programs in Baltimore City. We were taking kids that really had very, very, very weak backgrounds. And we had to put much stronger support structures around them. We could not get them up to 73%, but we could generally get them up to 5 to 7% of that number. So we were still doing better than 90% of the schools in the country with them. But it does cost money, and anything that requires labor is costly. But if you're going to take students in, you've got to get them through. And I was looking at some numbers today from Massachusetts. We have community colleges that are graduating as small a number as 9% of their population in 3 years. and the highest is probably under 30% in 3 years. And, you know, I understand, I mean, my wife worked at a community college, I understand all the arguments as to why that happens, but from a societal perspective, we can't afford that anymore. It's just too much human capital being wasted and too much money being wasted. And the same thing is true at the 4-year level, where we go from, you know, low 40s to high 30s up to maybe the high 60s. And we're going to try to get everybody in our system up even higher. And I've talked to the chancellors about that, and they want to do that too. It is a challenge, and it's not easy.
I have a question about a lot of student cut, you know, especially all over the countries. I think most of the minority students very concerned about how could they afford it, you know,
yeah.
increasing in the tuitions. Could you share with us what's your plan to support it then? You know?
Well, my primary plan, which I'm not sure I'll be successful at, is to convince the state that higher education is a higher priority than they have seen in their funding. If you go to the legislature as a whole, or the legislators in particular, they all are pro-education. But they always come back to, we don't have enough money, and hence we're doing as best we can. And I understand that. But if something is a high priority, you fund it in that way. And in this state, we are spending more money on prisons than we are on higher education. Do we want to do that? Now, you ask anybody that, they'll say, no, we don't want to do that, but we have no choice. Well, you do have a choice, because it's a chicken and egg. The more education, the less prisons. And at some point, you've got to step up and feed education if you want to stop feeding prisons. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen. And so we've been working with the legislature in a very constructive way, not a confrontational way, to explain, you know, where we feel we are weak compared to states we want to compete with, and coming up with models that they can use to help us be successful. And let me just give you a couple of examples. In all the states I have worked, and in all the states that I remember that I have visited or worked in as a consultant, you can't build academic buildings with university dollars or system dollars. You can only build them with state dollars. So universities have historically built university unions, athletic facilities, parking facilities, and housing. And because we have fees in dollars coming in to support those, but we don't build academic buildings. So in this system, because the state has not funded academic buildings at any appreciable level for decades, the system picked up that expense itself, and we did $2.5+ billion worth of construction over the last 10 years, with only about 13 or 14%, depending on which spreadsheet you look at, coming from the state. That means the chancellors, out of their operating budgets, are paying for those bonds, and that's tens of millions of dollars on each campus that could be going into faculty, student support, student life, a whole series of traditional things. So I've said to the legislators who you know, live in a by definition political world, you know, why not go back to a model where you float the bonds, which are 30 or 40-year bonds, and pay for it, and allow us to use our debt money instead of on debt for operating. Go back to a more traditional model. Now, it's taken us 25 years to get into this mess. Maybe it takes us 20 years to get back out of it, but let's get back out of it slowly. Or do what they did in Connecticut and just take over the debt from us. I don't think the chances of that are real good, but we're at least giving them that option. But it is something they can do. And actually, I met with the bonding committee of the legislature, and they're very interested. I met with the chair, the board of the Massachusetts Business Roundtable, and they're very supportive. I've met with a number of business groups, for example, the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership Group. They're going to write a letter of support to that idea. So that's an idea that might gain traction. The other thing we're doing that we never did 20 years ago, private universities, all because they're so expensive, charge a certain percentage of students 100% of tuition. And they take 30 cents on every dollar and they use it for aid for the students that can't afford to go. And that's how they fill the campus. We never used to do that. If you got financial aid from us, it was either because of federal or state financial aid. We didn't give university aid. Today, I don't know, but most campuses are in the 10, 15, 20% of their tuition dollars going into aid, because the federal government has been diluted, the Pell Grant has just not kept pace, and state dollars have dried up. So that's another big debt that we're paying that we never used to pay before. There are a whole series of those kinds of things that we're sort of into because, you know, we have a moral conscience. But it's time really, as I like to say, for the state to put its money where its mouth is. They really need to fund education. And let me use Maryland as an example, and then I'll stop. The governor of Maryland, Governor O'Malley, who was elected for just his second term, just as was Governor Patrick, came in. And we didn't know where he stood on higher ed particularly. We knew he was a very pro-K through 12. So he came in and said, higher ed is too expensive in Maryland. To go to the University of Maryland will cost you $7,400 a year, and that's too expensive. Well, that's about half of what it costs to go to the University of Massachusetts. So he froze tuition for 3 years, so that it stayed $7,400 for 3 years. And the millions of dollars we would have gotten by 4% and 5% tuition increases every year, which we need to just keep pace with inflation, he gave us the money from state dollars. And he has the same kind of budget we have here in Massachusetts. So he was cutting all the other agencies in the state and funding higher education. He would still cut us, but he would cut us after he built the budget. So he would put tens of millions into the new budget and then cut 20% of that out. So at the end of every year, we were still better off than the year before. At the end of 3 years of cut, my budget was still about $16 million bigger than it was 3 years earlier. That's prioritization. And that's what we need if you want to have a state that's really pro-education. The other thing I'm doing is appealing to the alpha male, alpha female syndrome. Do you really want Connecticut to be viewed as a better state than Massachusetts? And UConn to be as a better university than the University of Massachusetts? Nobody in elected office wants that to happen in Massachusetts. So let's fix it. Let's compete. And we'll see if that helps. We also buy lottery tickets, by the way.